Welcome back to How the Wise One Grows. So you've probably heard the rhetoric before that psychedelics are going to fry your brain like you would fry an egg. But today we are going to learn about the storytelling behind that rhetoric through the history of mushrooms. So today Liz Bowden is going to speak to us all about the stories that we have been told and tell ourselves, and the history of mushrooms and the role they've played on the evolution of the brain and in society from the ancient Greeks to microdosing today. But before we get started, let's take a moment to land here together with 3 deep breaths. So just take a moment to notice where your body makes contact with the earth. And you can gently rest your eyes if it feels safe. And take a big breath in, fill your chest, fill your belly with air. Exhale, open your mouth, let it out. Again, inhale, fill the chest, fill the belly with air. Exhale, let it go. One more inhale. And exhale. And return to where your body makes contact with the earth as you open your eyes and return to this space. So if you missed the first conversation we had with Liz, you need to go back and listen. It's episode 5, and Liz talked all about microdosing and earth medicine. And today she's going to lean into this conversation a little bit more.
Should I just dive right in?
I think you should just dive right in. I'm ready for it. I'm just ready to soak it in.
Yeah. So let me just frame this a little bit. Everything that is about to come out of me and be channeled out of me is actually this beautiful workshop that was pieced together over many years of living in the jungle, living off of the land, and being taught and learning under really beautiful herbalists and wise women and how they interact and have a relationship with medicine and what that means for them and the earth. And so I also want to say everything that I'm about to say is also a story, just like anything else, right? And it is Liz's story and Liz's picture of the history of mushrooms and how we treat the earth and use medicines. And so to just have an open mind, right? Just an open, curious mind about everything that I'm about to say, which I hope we do anytime any human tells us anything, right? Because it's always coming through a frame. It's always coming through a filter. And I just want to rewrite and retell the story of mushrooms, which can also be known as the psychedelic mushrooms, as they've been painted in other ways in the past. And a few guiding questions for this particular transmission, if you will, or workshop on mushrooms that I like to ask. One is, if we were to zoom out and look at the universe and look at the world right now, what do we think would be an answer for all of us, or a medicine that we could all really use right now? What can we as a collective community, what do we need right now in this particular moment in time? And the other question is, what does the feminine mean to us? And how does that play out and express itself in our lives? For me, the feminine has a lot to do with, it's not just female or woman. I definitely see the feminine everything, right? And it's more about slowing down and softening and listening and observing before acting. right? And this is just to kind of bring us into the beginning of this workshop. And so I'll pause there and I'll move now into a quote that really was a magnetic moment for me, where all of these little points came together and made like a big whoa moment in Liz's life. I was at Punta Mona, which is an amazing permaculture center in Costa Rica, living off the land, living in community. And one of my teachers and dear sisters, Sue's, held a health sovereignty workshop. This is the first time I've ever heard of the word health sovereignty or this phrase. And she was actually leading it with Amanda Sage. And if you don't know who she is, she's an amazing artist. And they were doing this amazing fusion of art therapy and health sovereignty. So learning about how to make your medicines and learning how to express creatively through paint, through painting. And the quote was, "Plants and fungi are wise beyond our understanding and have helped us to heal many times over. Reconnecting with this takes the intention and willingness to remember that we have sovereignty over the decisions we make for our body and spirit, to remember that medicine can bring vitality rather than treat illness, and to remember that the plants, fungi, and microorganisms are allies willing to support our health journeys." Yeah. And it was just like a big moment for me where I was like, wow. At that time, I was taking Adderall, Lexapro, and was just dabbling into making my own tinctures from plants, etc. And it kind of set me off on this mission to learn more about this.
So was that kind of the moment for you where you started to have a shift in your relationship with earth medicine and with the medicines you were on and the way you were exploring that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the moment. And this word vitality, mm-hmm. I was like, wait, what? Like,
yeah.
I think I had just like been like, oh, we're all just kind of out here living on our baseline. Like we're all just out here trying to get by.
It's so much about survival and the day to day. And especially if there's someone, dealing with mental health on a wide spectrum, it's often more about survival versus thriving.
Yeah, exactly. As someone who was experiencing adverse side effects to my medicines, I was like, wait a minute. I was like, you need to tell me that if I can get to the complete natural state of the medicine, like the purity, just straight to the literal roots of medicine, because what our pharmaceuticals are based off of are actual plants and herbs, right? If I can get to that, then and this is like before this was Liz's first thought, that I am able to have an interaction with something, receive something that won't have these adverse side effects and will not only support me, but will heal, like actually heal, so that I don't even need the medicine, so that I can thrive and not have to feel like I need this. Because before it was such a dependency. It was like, I can't be Liz unless I have this. Like everything's fine as long as I can take my Adderall in the morning, and I was just like, woof, that's a tough relationship to be in with something. Right. And that's even evolved now as I understand, like, it's all about relationship, and that relationship doesn't necessarily need to be like a certain substance as much as like even just breathing, right? Or just with myself, right? Like, am I in my body right now before I like reach for the substance or anything else? So it's ever evolving. Yeah.
I think that's such a key component, like how you're starting this conversation today, of having awareness of the stories we're coming into this conversation with, like the lens we were taught and to view the world and see this topic, having awareness of that. And then this awareness applies to everything we do. Like anytime you're reaching for something, taking that pause and what is my intention? What is the relationship I'm having with myself in this moment and this other thing before me as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sacred pause, that observation before just, doing.
Yeah.
That building of the consciousness before just acting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is empowering. It's so empowering to be able to go to that space.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I think I'll move into the history. And I think it's important that we know about the history um, for a few reasons, but it just gives a lot of context. Um, so we know that mushrooms have been used or have been, I shouldn't say used, right? There's like these words, noticing the English language here.
Yeah.
Right. Like a lot of indigenous languages, it's verbs. It's not even nouns. Like they're not even things to be owned. It's a way of being. So interesting. That's a page from Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass. But yeah, so we've had a relationship with mushrooms. And as far back as 5000 BCE, so we're talking 7,000 years ago, Neolithic times, and we know this because of cave drawings. The first recorded use or the first recorded relationship we know of with mushrooms is from an Algerian cave drawing. And we also have cave drawings in Spain, which I'd be really excited about because I have Spanish heritage. And so through these cave drawings, we know that our ancestors have come into contact with mushrooms for a very long time. We know in Guatemala, around like 1500 BCE, they had beautiful mushroom ceremonies, and mushrooms were known as Teonanacatl, which is flesh of the gods. We have the Rigveda, which is an Indian drink, or the Soma, which is the drink, which not necessarily, I don't think it was necessarily mushrooms, but it was some form of a psychedelic. And we have the Amanita muscaria from the Shikatka people of Siberia, which is like the Amanita muscaria is the emoji that we see on our phones. Anyway,
the little mushroom emoji.
With the little mushroom emoji.
It just always reminds me of like, what's it called? Like Game Boy, Mario Kart, like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And these mushrooms were used in a shamanic way, in a very like ritualistic, ceremonial way. Moving on, we have the Greeks later on in history interacting with mushrooms, 2000 BCE with, this one was ergot, which is a fungus. And ergot is actually LSD. It's like the thing that activates what LSD does. And but what that actually is a fungus that grows on wheat. And so we have this, we know about this drink called the kykeon that was used in these, I've heard these, they're called the Eleusinian Mysteries. And they were once called the Greeks back then, like their Burning Man. What would be our like present day Burning Man is what at one time heard it referred to as, and I thought that was hilarious. Because these Eleusinian Mysteries during this time was when leaders from all over would come and they would talk about like how they were going to lead for the rest of the year and different things like that would come up around theater and mathematics and science. It was like a summit. But there was also a lot of partying. And one of the main drinks was the kykeon. And before we just thought that it was alcohol, right? They were just getting really drunk and having a good time. But now there's this amazing book. What is it? The Road to Elysius. And it talks about the connection that we now find in the artifacts. Like we found the old cups of the kykeon, and we found like proof that it actually had ergot in it. So we find that it wasn't just barley, but it was had barley that was contaminated with ergot. So they were actually perhaps tripping. Like,
I think they're just like having a beer, but they're going on an adventure.
And I think like there's probably a whole ritual around this, right? There's probably like a whole ritual to ensure that the ergot was growing, like, because I'm sure that this might have stumbled upon it and then they realized what happened and they were like, oh, wow. And then.
So then it was intentional.
Yes. And it kind of became a part of the creation of the kykeon, right? Because if you can imagine, like having that experience versus being drunk, you're probably going to be like, wow, this is profound. Anyways, through the Eleusinian mysteries, this is all just, again, stories, right? Through these, big summits, if you will, they were highly regarded. Like these gatherings, the Eleusinian mysteries, were one of, if not, could be one of the most important events that happen during the year. And from these, gatherings, we find things like philosophy flourishing, mathematics, new ways of thinking about science, democracy, like huge foundational pillars to our current culture. So again, just noticing like how some of these earth medicines were used back when we go back in history.
Do you know if that was like an intention of like that ceremony time? If it was like, we're going to do this experience and we have the intention of like, cultivating these other things, or was it something that just unfolded? Like they had this ritual ceremony where these things were happening, and then after these discoveries were occurring, and it wasn't necessarily like, we're going to do X so we get Y.
I think it was both, right? And, I will say I am not an expert in the Eleusinian mysteries in particular. And it's so interesting if we can dive into it more around it and study up on it more. But from what I have read on it and what I do understand of it, what we do know is that it was a very, very important gathering. There was a lot of intention. There was a whole ritual to it. Like there's a beginning, a middle, and it ends. It had certain rites of passages even within it of who could even attend. So I know that there was a lot of intention built around how it was conducted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, we saw so much flourish and come from that.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess I'm sure you're going to go into this, but just how did we get from that to like the war on drugs?
Yeah, I'll get to that. Well, I do want to speak first to Maria Sabina. Did we speak on her before?
I think you might have mentioned her name, and I've looked into her on my own since, so I would love for you to speak to her.
And she's a big component to that question as well. So we find out about this beautiful priestess and curandera named Maria Sabina. She is a Maza Azteca priestess and curandera from Mexico, Oaxaca, Mexico, to be exact. And we find out about her through Gordon Wasson, who is a Life magazine journalist. And what people don't normally know or say is it was actually his wife that...
Yeah. Tends to be that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. And he was like, the story goes is he, was very much in love with her and followed her wherever she took him because she was such a brilliant mind, so intelligent, an intelligent ethnobotanist, and just knew so many things about mushrooms and fungi and plants, and was a huge earth enthusiast. And she found out about this priestess in Mexico conducting baleras, which means like healing visuals to commune with God and experience enlightenment through the use of psychedelic mushrooms, through the use of psilocybin. And it was very much tied to Christianity, the way that she worked with the mushrooms. At this time, like we had already had missionaries come in and, do what they do in cultures. And so there's pictures that there's Jesus and there's saints. It's very much like a holy ceremony that she's conducting with the use of the mushrooms, and she's healing the sick. She is creating beautiful spiritual experiences for people and supporting her community through the mushrooms. And
can you remind me what time period this was again?
Yeah, 1957.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not that long ago.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, exactly. And also 57, 60s during the height of the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So she's healing people.
Yeah. So actually a quote, and this is not a direct quote, this is a translation, but she says the Niños Santos means little saints, which is how she endearingly called the mushrooms. So if you hear people call mushrooms Niños Santos, it's in reference to how Maria Sabina would name them. So she says the Niños Santos heal. They lower fevers, cure colds, and give freedom from toothaches. They pull the evil spirits out of the body or free the spirit from the sick. So Gordon Wasson, being the journalist that he is, decides to go down and meet Maria Sabina. And Maria Sabina, being the beautiful priestess that she is, lovingly welcomes him in, as she does anyone who shows up at her door. And he does a whole story on her and her visuals and just like whole documentation on it. And he publishes this article in Lifetime magazine. And the thing about that is, I don't know if there was permission, right? And I don't even know if she would even know how to get permission to this, right? So this is published out during the 60s. And next thing you know, we see waves of people from the States coming to experience Maria Sabina. And we're talking a small little village with little to no infrastructure that has, just enough to support their community, all of a sudden receiving all of these foreigners.
So Westerners are completely overwhelming.
Yes.
This little village.
Yes. And it's a lot. At one point, the authorities are like, why are you serving these Westerners drugs? And she is, of course, like accepting everyone. And she is saying, like, I can't deny anyone. If they would like, then I'm going to get, like, she's just doing what she feels is her duty. And there's just like all these people coming in, and even like big names, like I think like Led Zeppelin even, and then he talked about it, and it just kind of became a popular thing. And here we are again. Like, if we can kind of just zoom out and look at what can happen. And I don't want to demonize anyone here, or I don't even feel, I think like casting blame even on Gordon Wasson is a part of the problem. I think it's more of understanding what happens when you have really hungry, like culturally hungry people, right?
I think it goes back to kind of how you started this conversation too, when we looked at the word use. Like, again, we're using this thing versus seeing that there's a relationship with it. And we use things and approach it from this Western approach of take versus having that wise relationship with people, with the earth, with everything.
Yeah. And so, Maria Sabina eventually gets outcasted from her community. At one point, her house gets burned down. Like, it's a tragedy. It's a full-on tragedy what happens to her. A quote, again, translated is, I realized the young people with long hair didn't need me to eat the little things. Kids ate them anywhere at any time, and they didn't respect our customs. And this just kind of shows, again, what happens when we are a part of a transactional society, a transactionally based culture, right? It's like tragedy happens, right? We lose respect. We don't know how to be in relationship with things. And so, I just like to speak to Maria Sabina because, first off, we wouldn't even know about mushroom ceremonies or this custom at all if it weren't for that article being published. And also just like a wording of like, this is what can happen when we come to the table starting. I was listening to this podcast with my teacher and sweet sister, Laura Dawn. She leads the Psychedelic Leadership podcast, and they were talking about rituals. I'm blanking on his name right now. We can maybe put in the show notes, but he was talking about how cultural appropriation, and this is what happens when like you come to the table starving, and you're just like eating and eating, you're just taking and taking. And like, how can we come to the table with an offering? Even, you know?
Oh, that's a great reframe.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important that we name that context today, because especially in the West, as psilocybin is becoming more, I guess, like accepted medicinally and like in the therapy space and whatnot, really being intentional about how can we not appropriate, which, I mean, we are, but how can we do it, I guess, in more of a relational way? What offering can we bring? How can we do less harm in this?
Yes, exactly. Because we all need, I mean, we have a desire. It proves that we have a desire to have customs and a culture that we love and rituals and meaning making. Like, we all need meaning making. Like, you don't want to be depressed, right? We'll have meaning making involved. We all have this like desire, and it's a necessity, right, of being human, to have these customs. It's just, how do we do that again in a way where it's regenerative, right? And it's intiety, right? It's in a beautiful reciprocal relationship with things. And that's just going to take time and restoration. And so the main takeaway that I have from the cave drawings and learning about Maria Sabina and learning about other ancestors, I also just want to say that mushrooms can be found, or psychedelic mushrooms can be found all over the world, which means that all of our ancestors came into contact with that, right? So like, unlike, things like ayahuasca and other psychedelic earth medicines, it's safe to say that all of our ancestors at one point in time came into contact with mushrooms, which is so beautiful and amazing, right? And like, I always think about the mycelial network and how, it's the World Wide Web. It's the big connector of everything. And like, I see that within all of our ancestors. Like, all of our ancestors' intelligence and minds were at some point connected through this one thing, which is mushrooms, fungus. And so like, yes, this is something that you can begin to tap into, like maybe your ancestry and your lineage. And yeah, I just think that's so cool to think about. And one of the main takeaways is our ancestors interacted with these in ceremony. And in these ceremonies, it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to take this and maybe something will happen. It was very intentional. And they went into ceremony to receive wisdom from the earth. They went into ceremony to become better ancestors, right? They went into ceremony to become better community members, to heal, to learn, to expand, and also to learn how to play and be a human, right? How beautiful is that? And then we get mix-ins. And then we get the war on drugs. So if we go back to Maria, we have this big influx of people. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, the mushrooms. We've got like the Grateful Dead going. We've got just everything that is the first wave of psychedelics in American history. And it is so not rooted. Like, there are no, like, integration wasn't even a thing then, right? It's all over the place.
Can you briefly speak to integration for those who don't know what that is?
Yes. So integration is a framework or a concept around, after you interact with psychedelics, how do you weave that into your mundane? Like, how do you begin to embody the wisdom that you received, rather than just taking it and then, oh, that was a cool experience I had, and nothing changes after that. Right? Like, so how do you begin to embody in your presence, show up differently in your life based off of this like really beautiful, most of the time intense experience that you might have had? So that's and we can go more into integration more, because that's a big thing that I'm in right now.
Yeah.
And I think like that's everything, right? It's everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to and knowing was integrated.
Like, we didn't know. Like, it was just the beginning of everything. I mean, we had this is when we have Richard Alpert who is actually Baba Ram Dass. And he, at the time, was a Harvard professor, and he gets fired because of, you know, his love for and advocation of LSD and all of the research that he was doing on it. And mind you, okay, so before we even had Nixon, so actually, let me backtrack because this is before Nixon. Before that even happens, from 1947 to 1970, we have over 40,000 patients in over 1,000 studies using psychedelics, in particular psilocybin and LSD. And we're finding amazing results. Like the medical field is just like, whoa, like amazed by these medicines. And then in the middle of that, in the 60s, is when we had the hippies, counterculture, etc. happen. So in the 1970s, when we have Nixon and the war on drugs. So like this is all kind of leading up to this. And then we have, this is when Richard Alpert, who's Ram Dass, comes in, and Timothy Leary, and they're doing like all of these amazing studies and research on them. There's some really cool studies that came out. A lot of them revolving around like how you have like really beautiful mystical experiences when on these substances. But because it was unbridled, because it was all over the place, I mean, if we just look back at some of the pictures of like, you know, Altamont in that free concert, and like just some of the other things, like the Jimi Hendrix era, like it was a shit show. It was all over the place. So yeah, right. And all of a sudden the government, there was a lot, and because there was a lot of psychedelic use, psychedelics, what they do is they have you question everything. So a lot of the youth were questioning the government. They were questioning the systems. They began to take agency and power back and question everything. But it came at a rate that caused so much chaos that Richard Nixon and the government were like, we have got to do something. So then we see the Controlled Substance Act making these psychedelic drugs illegal. But they also deem them with no medical value.
After years and years of research that we're maybe just starting to tap into again.
Exactly. And, you know, there were some like heroes who were risking their lives and still, you know, underground, continuing research. But yeah, it was. Yeah. And we also had everything that needed to shift to take back the control, right? To bring everyone back under control and for us to respect the government again and all these things. Again, this is Liz's, how she is looking at this. This is when we then see narrative painting. This is when we then see, this is your brain on drugs. And all of a sudden, mushrooms are now drugs. LSD is now a drug, right? And if we look back, like ergot was used by the Greeks. So there's all of a sudden they're lumped into these controlled substances. And, you know, we see the egg cracking in the skillet. Like, this is your brain on drugs. And all of the, like, your child's going to jump out of the window if they take these, and just all of the propaganda that came out of that. And it wasn't just like a little bit, it took over the culture, right?
And it was effective. Like, that is still common in many people's minds when they think about mushrooms, when they think about, you know, psychedelics.
It's like so ingrained to the point where we don't even realize it until we question it. I literally thought when I heard people talk about LSD and like when I would go to fish shows and all these things, I remember like if I were to interact with them, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to take this, but I know like I can't take a lot because it's taking a scoop out of my brain. That's literally what the narrative was in my head. Like I thought like, oh, if I take these mushrooms, like I got to be careful because it's going to actually harm my brain. Right. Wow, how powerful is that? It was definitely how I even thought about them, and I'm talking like even just 5 years ago. You know, and it wasn't until I did this dive where I was like, what? Like we were completely like, I felt lied to. I was like, what is going on? Um, I also want to note this. So in 1982, this is later down the line, we also have Terence McKenna's stoned ape hypothesis, which I find so interesting. Um, and it's about how psilocybin and mushrooms led to human evolution and rapidly advanced cognition, especially within language and spirituality. And this hypothesis was formed to explain, because we have this unknown explanation and event that's happening. If you study evolution, you learn about how the human brain somehow, we don't know how, tripled in size in just 2 million years. That is a drastic jump when you like look at the trajectory of everything. And so there's been many hypotheses as to why this happened, why this crazy jump tripled in size in just 2 million years. And Terence McKenna then comes up with this. It's because this also happens to coincide with the time when hunters and gatherers are interacting with mushrooms. So it's super interesting. And I loved learning about this, because then when I read The Road to Elysius and learned about the Greeks and how, you know, we have philosophy and education, all these things, and how they may have been interacting with ergot, which is, you know, what we know as LSD, I find that super interesting, right? Like this brain enhancing and expanding substances used for human evolution. Like, wow. Wow, how powerful is that? Yeah, and we can even like go into how LSD is actually the foundation of SSRIs. It was actually,
What are SSRIs?
SSRIs are what a lot of people are prescribed for things such as anxiety and depression. Yeah, it's like the first line of action. Got it for most doctors and in the medical field as of right now in the Western society. I'm hoping that story changes, but that's the go-to. And that's something like, yeah, you could feel into, but again, there's a lot of repercussions when we all of a sudden deem something that was once so sacred now like a problem. There is a lot of fear still around these medicines. And I mean, I've sat with these medicines in ceremony and outside of ceremony, and there is still an amount of anxiety and fear before going in, right? And that's a healthy form of respect that I have for these substances. And yet, like, I really hope we can all start to begin to dismantle some of the fear that was built around fake science and just like not, you know.
Yeah, I think that's really important to name, is that like, as we're debunking things that we were taught and understanding what is and isn't true, it doesn't mean that like everyone should just take psychedelics all the time and be totally nonchalant about it. Like, you do need to have respect for it, and they are powerful. So being really, really intentional about the use and the way in which it's used, and not just like nonchalantly and recklessly and harmfully using substances.
Yeah. Right. And again, like, how can we come back to the ancestral way of working with this medicines in a spiritual, sacred, intentional way, right? Because we all saw what happened with the first wave of psychedelics, right? It was just insane. You know, we had a lot of harm actually done because there was no frameworks. There was no there was no talk about like set and setting, right? It was just like, whoa, shit, I just took 10 grams and now I like caused more trauma, right? Because you were not ready for that experience.
Yes.
And you were not properly held, and you were not in a safe place to go there, right? So as this, you know, this time period has kind of been labeled this second wave, or like the psychedelic renaissance, if you will, of these medicines. And how can we ensure that that doesn't happen again? Like, there's so many different things that we're learning as humans as we come back into interaction with these medicines. But I just like to remember, like, this is deep for me. It's deeply spiritual, and also like spirituality can be fun and silly. Like I also don't want to be that person that's like, you need to have like a full on like shaman, and like, and that doesn't speak to you. That doesn't speak to you. Like there's something to be said about like getting a bunch of your friends together and having like an amazing night with interacting with these as well too, right? Right? If that's expanding your capacity to feel like pleasure and joy, like that's a form of medicine. And especially if you can bring that into your everyday life, right? Because we know that like love and compassion actually activates much more of our brain than anger and fear, right? And like leads to health, right? Leads to vitality, leads to thriving as a human. So yeah, and I think that's also why we now see microdosing being such a popular thing, is because like it's incremental. It's such a small amount. So when you talk about microdosing, we're talking about a sub-perceptual amount. So you're not even taking enough to really be aware that you even took it. It's like you take it and then you look back on your day and you're like, wow, I was really present. And so it's almost like,
I think you described it to me as fairy dust.
Yes,
and you're like, yeah, it's like fairy dust. Yeah.
Again, going back to Maria Sabina and our culture, we're in a culture right now that just wants the one and done. Like, just give me the medicine and cure me now. Just let me not feel this way anymore. Just let me be healed, right? In this instant gratification. Let me just get on the Instagram and get that instant like once I post. Like, let me get that validation. This form of starvation, right? That's going on. And if we can start to look at the healing journey, look at the medical system or the way that we treat medicines and our bodies and the healing process in a way that is more relational, incremental, slow. Right. I hear a lot about like quantum leaping and these like huge shifts. And I'm like, yes, I believe in miracles. Hell to the yes. Like, miracles happen to me each and every day, especially today, is a mantra that I have every morning. And I so profoundly know this to be true. And yet, how do we titrate this? How do we stay embodied through the process of healing so that we don't have a crazy withdrawal? We don't have this, what is the word? We don't, spiral back into our old ways. How do we make it so that's sustainable and regenerative and it makes lasting transformation in our life? Right? And just like when you plant a seed and it takes watering it and attention and sunlight and community and time, that's what our healing requires. Right? So it's not like you're going to go take 5 grams of mushrooms and be completely healed. We signed up to be humans and a human timeline, right? And we signed up to be on the earth, on the earth's timeline, and in a timeline that is, in time is construct, but there is a natural order to things, right? And that must be respected. And not only must it be respected, but it's where the magic really is.
Yeah, like miracles, like you were saying before, don't have to be big grand gestures. They're the small little things every day. They're breathing when you wake up in the morning.
Yeah. I think it's like I forget who it's an indigenous saying of like, you're not actually a grown up until you're in your 50s. And I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Like, can we just...
And then I feel like you start getting young again. I feel like the older you get, the more playful you should get.
Exactly. And so that's why I really love working with microdosing, is because it kind of requires us to like, so how much can we slow this down?
Mm-hmm.
Like the nervous system. We have a nervous system. Our human bodies are built with minerals and cells and atoms, and it has like a divine structure to it. And again, it follows a divine order. And for things to actually land, for integration to actually happen, for change to actually become a part of our DNA, it requires like a certain process, right? And it takes a pace that
Mm-hmm.
we can really embody, right? And just this word embody is really big for me because, one of my dear friends has a lyric in its song, and it's like fully risen or fully rooted, fully risen. And, or it might be fully anchored, fully risen, but I say deeply rooted, fully risen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just this idea of like, how can we remember so deeply that we are humans on this earth and we've chosen to be human, and there's so much mud and ickiness and angst and anger and tears and frustration. All of it's here, and like pleasure and all the things that
Mm-hmm.
come with being human. That's amazing. And we have the freaking cosmos, and we have this spiritual connection to source. And there's angels always around us, whether we can see them or not. And we have
Mm-hmm.
like this like spiritual realm and this like divinity to us. And how do we stay anchored while experiencing that and weaving that into everything and finding that like middle ground,
Mm-hmm.
like that to me is integration, right?
Yes. How can we hold the opposites, right? That's wholeness. And I think we are often taught either or, but like wholeness, our existence, to me, yoga union is that embodiment of both, of the juxtaposition of everything in every moment.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, there's so much we can say about that. I'm a part of many beautiful groups in the psychedelic arena. Um, and I do see how there's just ceremony after ceremony happening and all of these outlets going on, and there's like just this big wave. And I think what I mainly like, I said this on someone else's podcast, I don't even think that everyone is meant to be taking these, right?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And I think that just speaks to the fact that, again, something that I truly believe, like when I'm interacting with mushrooms, I'm eating the earth and I am the earth, right? Like humus, like the Latin root of humus, which is soil, is human, which is humble, right? It's like all the same thing. I come from the ground, I am the ground. And therefore, when I'm interacting with something that is of the earth, I'm interacting with myself to some extent. And so it's just highlighting and activating wisdom, gnosis, this wise inner knowing that I already know. It's already within me. It's just shining a big old flashlight on it. And sometimes it's such a great light. It can be so extremely overwhelmingly beautiful that it brings me to my knees in awe. And I'm like, wow, how could I have forgotten? Like, here I am. Wow. And a lot of it doesn't can't be said in words. English just doesn't do it. And I think this is, so going back to this question of, what does the world need right now? What is our medicine? A lot of it for me is a resurgence and a reharmonization of the feminine, of weaving back in the feminine into our lives, right? I affiliate the earth as the earth has both elements, masculine and feminine. But I see the earth in general, the land at least, as the body, as the feminine, and then the head more of like the masculine. And how can we make this like, long journey back, another Native American problem? How do we make the longest journey from our head to our heart? And how do we take that journey back down to the heart, back down to the body? We have become so head mind based, so controlling. It's like everything. We have to have a plan. We have to know everything. And we have slowly lost the knowing of our body in that process. Or we have deemed it not important, or like that's like animalistic and primal, and that on the hierarchy, that's not as moral even as what you can do with educational things through the mind. Does that make sense? That's the first time I've ever been to something like that. Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I think like when you first held space for that question, like I think a lot of it for me is what I've been exploring through this podcast is like how we can reconnect like to ourselves, to one another, and to the natural world. And I think that's so much of what is capable when we live with awareness and intention. And I think mushrooms are a part of ourselves that, like you were saying, like that it mimics the serotonin. It's not changing anything. It's not adding anything new, but it's just saying like, remember this. Like, and I think what we are in deep deprivation of and need in the world today is that reconnection of our relationship with the earth. And then that ripples into everyone and everything as well. But I think similar to what you said is like, that's where the divine feminine can come in. It's not about control and dominance. It's about care and relationship. And maybe that's what is possible in this, second wave, this renaissance of mushrooms can be like with more emphasis on microdosing. There can be more emphasis on that embodiment and intention and integration to help us remember and to help us reconnect.
Yeah. This deep remembering of how to be human, and what that means for us. Like how do we reconnect to the land? How do, there's even a part of me that believes like, even if we could heal our relationship to food, so much can be done, because healing our relationship to food is healing our relationship to the land. Which is healing our relationship to our bodies. I mean, there is no coincidence when we look at how we treat our bodies and like the food system and the devastation that is our food system right now. And then the links and the correlation to the ecological crisis going on right now. A macrocosm to a microcosm. It's all related. If we can start to heal that relationship that we have with the food and how we grow it and what we put into our bodies, knowing that that's everything and so important, and if that's the fuel and the energy that we give out as humans, only then will we start to see a shift in the climate and in everything that's going on with the earth. Right? And the devastating, and again, there's that transactional relationship of like, let me take these resources without having a 7th generation mindset, right? This Native American mindset of like, well, what about the future? What about my grandkids? Like, how can we incorporate that into our decisions? The point,
Where can someone start as they want to rewrite their story with their relationship with psychedelics and or the earth? Like, how can we start to begin again here?
follow the threads.
Mm.
I think something that's so beautiful about being a human and living on Earth is how we each are so highly unique, right? We each have such a beautiful, like I'm imagining like all of these different mandalas. We each have such a beautiful, unique code and blueprint and frequency as a human that was weaved by many, many ancestors' hands, like and many different experiences you had as a human. And so whatever, maybe there was something that I said that triggered you, or maybe there was something that I said that just had a profound pause within you. Follow that, like whatever that is. Like listen to those little tugs that kind of like stop you in your tracks. And then just take that one step at a time and see where it leads you.
Follow the threads. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of your time and wisdom that you shared with us today. For those who found a thread that maybe they want to continue to connect with you, do you mind sharing about, I'll have all your stuff in the show notes, just ways people can support you and your work.
Yeah. So my website is rewildspirit.com. On the Instagram world, I'm Liz, the letter B, Wildin. I also have rewild.spirit as an account. I have a microdosing course that will be coming out. It'll be self-paced. And I'll also be holding a group. And then I do a lot of one-on-one programs with people to kind of just build resiliency within the nervous system and get to know each individual personally.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to How the Wise One Grows today. If this podcast has been meaningful to you in some way, you can support it by joining the Dream Team for as little as $3 a month. There's a link to join in the show notes. And you can also support this podcast by sharing an episode you love with a friend and leaving a review.